Hello, friends and subscribers, and welcome back to another edition of Readings in Impact Investing. My name is Daniel Rosehill. This is a podcast taking written material in the world of impact investing and development finance and bringing it into audio. You can find this podcast online at readingsiниmpact.org. So we recently read a document from the Government Outcomes Lab, whose work I have commended. They have a terrific website with lots of really good resources, and they had a paper about outcomes funds. And I see now that it was a web page replicating a printed report. That report was called Understanding Outcomes Funds, a guide for practitioners, governments and donors. So I don't need to reread the paper because I read it previously. And if you want to listen to it, look for that episode about outcomes funds from the Government Outcomes Lab. But one thing that I did not read because I thought it was too much detail for the initial reading explaining the purpose was their excerpt from the Outcomes Fund directory. So I'm going to read that today to give people a flavour for what kind of outcomes funds are out there. Before I do so, I want to highlight that this document was authored because there are so many changes in the field so quickly. I always think it's important to note the date of any article. So this was December 2021. So this picture of the INDIGO INDIGO database is going to be a little bit out of date, but hopefully not dramatically out of date. And I won't read all of them, but I'll cherry pick. There's about 20 here. I'll pick a variety on the go that I hope will be representative. So let's start with the first one they have listed here. It's called the Brabant Outcomes Fund in the Netherlands. They have the geographic area for each fund, the host institution of the Outcomes Fund. This is for the whole list here. They have the aligned SDGs, which of the Sustainable Development Goals the Outcomes Fund is aligned with. They have the purpose, the mechanism, the currency, the total Outcomes Fund value, and the date that it got into operations. So just to remind folks that the purpose of the Outcomes Fund, the document itself makes the point that the nomenclature is a little bit problematic, perhaps, because these aren't for-profit investment vehicles as you tend to think of when you hear funds. These are pools of grant capital which are assembled to pay for outcomes for a specific problem. This is basically pay for results, also often referred to in development finance as RBF, which stands for results-based financing, and they tend to be thematic in nature. So let's take a look at the Brabant Outcomes Fund in the Netherlands. So its host institution is the Provisional Government of Noord-Brabant, so a local government in the Netherlands. Their aligned SDGs are 3, 8 and 10. So I don't yet know the SDGs by heart. Perhaps I should. So I might actually skip the aligned SDGs and just the purpose should give a good feel for that anyway. So the purpose is that the Brabant Outcomes Fund intends to explore the use of results-based financing contracts at the provisional level in Noord-Brabant in the Netherlands. Mechanism. The Brabant Outcomes Fund is the regional fund that invites social entrepreneurs to scale up social solutions. The fund endorses learning by doing and aims to investigate new forms of public-private cooperation. So the currency is euro and the total outcome fund value is €1 million started in 2018. So that's quite relatively small. Next, we have the Social Outcomes Fund in the UK. This was the host institution here is the Cabinet Office. They're aligned to 5 different SDGs. Purpose: the Social Outcomes Fund aims to grow the market in SIBs, for the SIBs being social impact bonds. For the Cabinet Office, which sponsors this fund, the objective is to catalyse and test innovative approaches to tackling complex issues using outcomes-based commissioning. Mechanism. The Social Outcomes Fund acknowledges that complex social issues span multiple parts of the public sector and respond by offering to top up outcomes payments. This fund provides development funding and support to applicants from the public and social sector, as well as offering to pay for a minority proportion of outcomes payments. 20 million pounds sterling. Date expression of interest was 2013. So I haven't had the time to check whether all of these funds are still operational. The purpose of this reading is more, as I said, to just try to explain what these can do. I'm trying to think of the relationship between outcomes funds and the other results-based financing or pay-for-outcomes mechanism of SIBs and DIBs is a bit like a hub and spoke. In the typical SIB or DIB mechanism, you have these three parties. You need the impact investor, the outcomes payer, and the delivery organization. And one of the problems with the SIB-DIB model that's been commonly cited is the complexity of establishing all these three parties every time. What outcomes funds can do is replace the role of the outcomes payer, which is usually a government or a multilateral organization in DIBs, and say, hey, okay, we have this fund of capital available for X problem, which is why they're thematic. Let's roll with this SIB or DIB, and that can theoretically make the process of scaling up SIBs and DIBs a lot better, a lot more efficient. Remember that according to the latest report from Brookings, the total value of SIBs and DIBs globally only is about $500 million, I'm not mistaken. So it's very, very, very small in the big scheme of things. And this is potentially a mechanism that can help to speed that up. And it's also not the case that outcomes funds have to channel their capital via SIBs or DIBs. They can just funnel public capital directly to philanthropic capital directly to working on problems. But they can bring in impact investors who have a profit motive through that second mechanism I mentioned of them being used to scale up the SIBs and DIBs. So then we have Commissioning Better Outcomes Fund in the UK. The Commissioning Better Outcomes Fund aims to grow the market in SIBs. The mission of the fund is also to enable more people, particularly those most in need, to lead fulfilling lives in enriching places and as part of successful companies. The mechanism is very similar to the Social Outcomes Fund. The Commissioning Better Outcomes Fund acknowledges that complex social issues span multiple parts of the public sector, and it responds by offering to top up outcomes payments, just like the Social Outcomes Fund. This fund provides development funding and support for applicants from the public and social sector, as well as offering to pay for a minority proportion of outcomes payments, £40 million sterling in 2013. Next, we have the Lagra Colombian Outcomes Fund that's been referenced recently in some of the GSG reports, if I'm not mistaken. The Colombia Outcomes Fund aims to increase employment in the formal sector in Colombia through outcomes-based commissioning. The Colombia Outcomes Fund aims to increase employment by exploring payment by results and impact bond financing mechanisms. The fund invites intermediary organizations to identify and work with service providers and investors to develop project proposals. Its value here is listed at 17, followed by 9 digits, so that would be 17 billion. And the currency is the COP, which, if I'm not mistaken, is the peso, so the local Colombian currency. And you can convert that to USD to see what it is. It would be worth doing that for all of these, just to compare on an equal footing at a date. So, okay, let's take another one from the UK, the Care Leavers United Kingdom. Aligned to housed within the Department for Education, aligned with SDGs 4, 8 and 17. The Care Leavers program seeks to support care leavers to participate in sustained education, employment and training through the mechanism of social impact bonds, and to build an evidence base of what works to support care leavers for EET. The Care Leavers Outcome Fund aims to work closely with local government commissioners to adopt a SIB mechanism that incentivizes and rewards positive outcomes for care leavers. So if I can point to a trend, it's that in the UK, where social financing innovation has the longest and most established history, we're seeing these outcomes funds as being very squarely focused on scaling up SIBs and DIBs. And as I said, doesn't mean that they all necessarily have to do that, but that is one common approach in the model of outcomes funds. So let's jump to EOF. to get away from the UK context just a little bit and look at some stuff in the developing world. So EOF Ghana and EOF Sierra Leone. So let's do Ghana firstly. Both of these funds are aligned to 4 and 17. The Education Outcomes Fund and the Ghana Accountability for Learning Outcomes Project aims to improve the quality of education in low-performing basic education schools and strengthen education sector equity and accountability in Ghana. The EOF aims to build the ecosystem for outcomes-based commissioning in Ghana by supporting a shift from activity-based to outcomes-focused funding and policy. This is listed, I don't know again if these figures are current as of 2024. This is listed as 25 million and 20 million US dollars for the Sierra Leone fund. So then we have, and just to clarify again, I'm going to make this point until I'm blue in the face, that outcomes funds here are not referring to investment vehicles. This is philanthropic capital, grant capital, being used to fund, to pay for outcomes rather than paying for inputs with these social problems. EOF, I'll be interested to see if the development community settles on a different name than Outcomes Fund over time. Perhaps it may, but this is what they're currently being called. So then we have EOF in Sierra Leone, again tracking to SDGs 4 and 17. Purpose is that the Sierra Leone Education Innovation Challenge is a partnership between the government, donor, NGOs and social investors and EOF to improve learning outcomes in literacy and numeracy in public schools through outcomes-focused funding and policy. The mechanism is that the EOF Sierra Leone partnership will build the ecosystem for outcomes-based commissioning through a shift from activity-based to outcomes-focused funding and policy. The project will ensure that service providers are accountable for delivering learning gains in foundational literacy and numeracy. Okay, let's jump back to the UK for a second, and because this is quite a well-known one, the Fair Chance Fund, tracking ATGs 8, 10 and 17, and the SDGs and the SDG boffins who have a better working memory than me and can know all the SDGs by their number. Will quickly know what those are, or you can look up a SDG diagram. The Fair Chance Fund aims to stimulate innovative, replicable approaches to improve accommodation and work outcomes for young homeless people, mostly aged 18 to 24, whose support needs are poorly met by existing services because of the complexity of their circumstances. The fund aims to reduce long-term benefit dependency, health problems and crime. The Fair Chance Fund commits to pay for outcomes achieved to allow voluntary sector and other providers the freedom to innovate and adapt to achieve the best possible results. Proposals are funded through social investments are preferred. So again, these funds work through the proposal model generally. This document from Government Outcomes Lab looked at the various, it kind of divided Outcomes Fund really into two emerging typologies. One was one in which the Outcomes Fund was quite prescriptive. It set a tariff and said, this is what we pay for outcomes, almost like a menu sheet. And the other one was more led by the partners, in which the Outcomes Fund said, the delivery partner said, this is what would work for us to, this is how much money, this is the outcomes payment that would make sense for this delivery. Does this work for you? So those are two different, basically we're looking at a difference in the kind of negotiation process between these. This is again talking in the context of outcomes funds working through kind of SIBs and DIBs type mechanisms. So there's two real emerging mechanisms there. Fair Chance Fund, by the way, was 15 million GBP, British pounds sterling, 2014. Okay, we have one in France called Égalité des chances économiques, excuse my French, which you can at least understand what that means from my high school French, the equality of economic opportunity. 8, 10, 17. The Égalité des chances économiques is an outcomes fund supported by the French Ministry of Social Economy, Solidarity and Responsibility to promote inclusive economic opportunities with particular attention to access to employment, access to entrepreneurial opportunities and financial services. The fund has been created under the L'Avenir National Framework supporting the use of contracts at impact, which are the French equivalent of CIBS, Contract à Impact, to promote innovation and prevention in social and environmental policies. These contracts are not intended to replace existing effective provision, but to complement it to provide additional innovative programs. €10 million 2020. So the average size, if I can again make some kind of an observation looking at these numbers, we're looking at kind of up to about 20 million for most of the funds, with some exceptions for bigger ones. And given that these are supposed to be pools of capital funding a lot of different projects, you can see that actually isn't such a big average fund size. Okay, now we have also in France Économie Circulaire, Circular Economy France. The Circular Economy Fund is promoted by ADME to support the emergence of innovative projects to protect the environment and the circular economy in particular. And that's a 10 million fund. And there is, let's see, another 5 different outcomes funds listed here. But let me just do the Portuguese one to finish, because it's a country we haven't covered. Portugal Social Innovation uses social impact bonds to promote social innovation and stimulate the social investment market in Portugal. The fund seeks to support actors in the social innovation and social entrepreneurship ecosystem to create new solutions for a wide range of problems. Portugal Social Innovation mobilizes funds from the European Social Fund as part of the Paris Portugal 2020 Partnership Agreement. These funds are channeled to the market through 4 financing instruments dedicated to funding projects that offer alternative and innovative solutions to solving social problems. 20 million euro 2016. So that is it in terms of, I think, the ones I want to share here. Obviously, this is an emerging model, and I will look for more updated literature on the emergence of these models and examples from the days past this. But this is still relatively recent. Thanks for listening to this episode of Readings in Impact Investing. Hope this has been helpful. If you want to spread awareness of this podcast among your work colleagues, please consider sharing readingsiниmpact.org, where you can find a link to the podcast on YouTube and the various podcatching services. Thank you for listening today.